Tag, what are you doing here? Oh, oh, okay. So Bathsheba sent you to check on me and see that I was doing okay. That's very nice. Bathsheba takes good care of me. She's very thoughtful of an old woman. Well, I am doing fine. What am I doing carrying the basket? Oh, well, these are some of the clothes that I had put away, some of my memories. And I was just wondering about giving them away since I am getting old and I'm not wearing them anymore. They're so full of memories. Oh, that makes you happy to hear that they're full of memories because Bathsheba wanted you to make sure that my memory was stirred. Well, it is stirred. She told you to have me tell you stories again? You must be the most story-loving person ever. Well, what's the story about this? Oh, this was a great dress. I loved this. I loved this dress. You see the jewels on it? The sparkles? This was the dress that was made for me to wear at my wedding to King Saul. It was a wonderful wedding, and I looked lovely too. Yes, I did. I looked beautiful. I was his concubine wife. He had already married Ahinoam and already began to bear children. She had borne him, let's see, by that time she had borne him Jonathan and Ishvi and Bosheth and I think Merab even. She might have even been pregnant with Michael. Michael. So this is what I wore when I married King Saul. He was already king. And it was quite an honor. I wasn't asked. I was just given by my father. And it was the daughter's duty to marry whomever her father chose for her. And I suppose I was blessed above most women. I was a young girl at the time, but as I grew older, I was able to have a wonderful life. I'm seeing over there that there's another gown that reminds me that after I was married to King Saul, that I bore children myself. And oh, how they loved it for me to wear this. The boys just loved this. They said I looked like the sun, and they named the eldest one for this one and the second eldest for that one, and they said I was carrying them with me wherever I went. They loved it when I wore my son dress because they were my sons. The two sons that I bore. Oh, they were good boys. They were wonderful young men. And I loved them so. I miss them so now. I think happily of those days when we were together and the sun shined upon us. But it didn't always last that way. You know what happened. Well, I'm getting ahead of my story. Let's look at what other dresses I have. Oh, in the course of time, King Saul was taken with evil spirits and he was tormented, and musicians were brought in to help him. We wore cheery clothes, trying to brighten his day. I remember wearing this. I remember he used to like it because of the colors and the circles. Reminded him, he said, of the wheels of life, and how our lives are encircled one by another and joined together. But not much went well for him once the Spirit of the Lord was lifted from him. And so it was that even bringing new people into the family didn't help. He brought David in to be a son-in-law. David was first going to marry Merab, but Saul changed his mind and gave her to another man. And eventually, David was given to Michal, the second daughter of Saul. They were just barely married when Saul began to increase in his rage. He tried to strangle David. He tried to throw spears at David. He plotted how he would murder him. And when Michal heard of it, she rescued her husband and sent him away. And he was safe. But she was in a lot of trouble. She had hid an idol in the bed and covered it with goat skin that looked like David's hair. But alas, the king could not be dissuaded from his murderous attempts, and he even tried to kill David in the bed when the bed was brought to him. That's how he discovered the deception and scolded his daughter, and for retribution he gave her to another husband. David was on the run, and he ran for a long time. He had a lot of men who joined up with him. David was the anointed of the Lord, but David would not touch God's anointed. He would not touch Saul. Even when he came into the cave while Saul was relieving himself, he could have murdered him right then. He came to Saul while Saul slept, and he stole his jar of water and his staff and spear, but he didn't kill David. David didn't kill him. They just played cat and mouse for the longest time. And then an enemy rose up. An enemy rose up against the nation. And Saul went out to war with his 3 sons. And in the course of the battle, Saul was slain and Jonathan was slain, and the other 2 sons of Saul were dead. There was just his son Ishbosheth who was left. And he was made king. He ruled for about 3 years with Abner, Saul's commander of the military, giving him orders. He was really more of a puppet king, but Ishbosheth inherited me as his concubine wife as he became king. And then, I'll never forget it, I had put away my cheerful clothes because not only was my husband Saul dead, but they had decapitated his head and Jonathan's head, and they had carried their heads through the towns of the enemies, and the enemies were mocking and holding them up for ridicule. The bodies were left in the fields. And so when I became wife to Ishbosheth, I wore these colors. This garment was what I wore as his wife, darker, older, and wiser, but not wise enough to fight off Abner. For Abner was still the captain of the guard, the commander of the army. And he came in and he forced himself upon me. When Ishbosheth found that Abner had raped me, he called him on it. But Abner got angry, having been discovered. You see, sleeping with the king's woman means that you are trying to usurp power from the king. And so when Ishbosheth asked Abner about his usurping power, Abner was angry enough that he went and made a pact with David that he would help destroy Ishbosheth and turn the kingdom over to David. In the course of time, when it was heard, the men of David went in to Ishbosheth while he slept. The king was asleep in his bed, and they beheaded him and took his head to King David. When King David saw it, he had like done to the slayers of the king. Though David was a bloody man of war, he did not believe in slaying a king in his bed. That was not an honorable way for a king to die. And so the slayers were put to death. And Abner's plan was implemented. David became king, and I was inherited by David to be his wife. As his wife, I was taken care of. I was guarded and held in honor. He did not come into me as he did into the young women, but he took care of me. And so it was, in the course of time, life was good to David. He built a palace. He acquired more wives, more children. But there came a drought to the land. 3 years, no rain. The crops did not grow. Without rain, there was no food for the cattle. There were no food for the people. The cattle died. There wasn't food to sustain us. So David sought the Lord. He thought what he heard was that there was a famine because of what had been done to the Gibeonites by Saul. You see, the Gibeonites were in the land when the Israelites came through, taking possession of the promised land. But the Gibeonites did not want to be destroyed like all the others who were taken in the land and utterly annihilated. So the Gibeonites wore old, raggy, holy clothes. They took old, moldy, hard crusts of bread, and they hardly filled their water flasks at all. And then they came with their worn-out shoes, approaching the Israelites as they had entered the promised land. And they made as if they've journeyed a far way. And they asked to have a peace treaty with the Israelites, that they would not kill any Israelites, nor would the Israelites kill any of the Gibeonites. And so the treaty was struck. Well, afterwards, when it was found that they were living in the land, the Israelites sought the Lord, and the Lord said, you know, a treaty is a treaty. You must honor your covenant with them. You must keep your word that you will not kill any of the Gibeonites. Well, when Saul came to be king, there came a time when he was enraged and wanted to please the Lord and thought that he would drive out the Gibeonites from the land. And so he began slaying the Gibeonites, and all but 100 of the Gibeonites were killed. When he stopped, the Gibeonites were down to just the bare numbers of men. 100 is not much at all to raise another nation. So when the famine came, and David thought he heard the Lord say the famine was because of the blood shed of the Gibeonites upon the land, innocent blood, a broken treaty. Instead of asking God what to do about it, David went to the Gibeonites and asked them what to do about it. He didn't find out from the Lord what to do, but he found out from the Gibeonites. They said, you give us the sons of Saul. That meant sons and grandsons, all the heritage. Well, as it was, you know, Jonathan and David had made a pact that they would guard each other's seed, that no harm would come to the other's children. Jonathan had a son. His name was Mephibosheth, the same as one of my sons, Mephibosheth. But Jonathan's Mephibosheth had been young when there was a raid on the town, and his nurse was carrying him, and she tripped and fell as she ran. And Mephibosheth was crippled from that time on and could not walk correctly. When Jonathan died, the servant of Jonathan took all of Jonathan's possessions and put Mephibosheth in a little house, not the palace in which he should have been living, but the servant took the grand house of Jonathan's. And so the son of Jonathan lived meager, like a beggar, in the house of the servant. One day, David called and said, "Where are the ancestors? Where are the sons of Jonathan? I promised him in an oath that I would care for his children." And he found the situation where the servant had become Lord, and the Lord of the house had become but a servant. He righted the situation, and he brought the son of Jonathan back into full inheritance of his property and made the servant return to servanthood. And then King David invited Jonathan's son to always be welcome at the table of the king and to be cared for by the king. So when the Gibeonites asked for the children and grandchildren of Saul, David did not give them Jonathan's son. David had the guards come and collect my two sons, who were the sons of Saul, my only two children. He also had them collect the 5 sons of Merab, who had been raised by Michal. When she was required to return to the palace upon David's kingship, she had been raising the young boys, for Merab had died a young age, and Michal had become their foster mother. She was taken away by force by Abner, and her husband followed along after her, crying and begging and pleading that she'd be allowed to stay with the family. But Abner would not hear of it, for the only way David would make a treaty with Abner was if he would bring back Michal. So she was ripped from her family. And now David was presenting the foster children of Michal to the Gibeonites. Everyone in the palace had to just wonder if it was his punishment for her having called him into question about his behavior the day the Ark of the Covenant was returned. It was a great thing to have the Ark return. Everyone was rejoicing. They were singing. They were dancing. Things were wonderful. But David came before the ark and took off his outer garments, something that's not to be done, for the nakedness of man is not to be seen. It says so in the book of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. And he took off his outer garment and he displayed himself with a priest's ephod. Only the priests wear the ephod. It's the right of the priest, but David was never called to be a priest. He was anointed to be a king. The priesthood did not belong to the house of David. No. And so it was that he danced in the priestly garments. And then he gave offerings and sacrifices. He made sacrifice to the Lord. That was what the priest was to do. He made offerings to the Lord. That was what the priest was to do. And then he distributed offerings to the people. That was what the priest was to do. And then he blessed the people. That was what the priest was to do. And then when David came to the house of David, to the palace of David, he began to bless his house. And Michal called him on it, for he was standing in the stead of a priest, and her father had died for doing such a thing. He had lost the kingdom. For it was when he was getting ready to go into battle that he did not wait for the prophet, priest, judge Samuel to come and bless the troops. He blessed the troops. And when Samuel arrived, the Lord said through Samuel that because Michal's father Saul had blessed the troops in the place of a priest, the kingdom would be taken from him. And another time he did an offering as a priest, confirming that he should not be the king. And so now her husband, the king, King David, was acting in the place of a priest, and Michal had to speak out. But he would hear none of it. Perhaps he had drank too much wine, for he reviled her as she had reviled his behavior, and he bragged to her that he was better than all of her family, and that he would do even more reviling things because he was king. Michal withdrew herself from him. And so now, when the Gibeonites had asked for the sons and grandsons, he did not bring forth Jonathan's son, he brought forth Michal's foster sons. He gave them to the Gibeonites. They took them and they killed them. They impaled them. They put them on tree stakes, hanging them up. And then King David gave an order that was against the law of God. King David said, "No one touches these 7 dead bodies. Leave them there for the animals and to rot in the sun." It was against Hebrew law that they should rot. Dead bodies were to be taken down before the sun went down. It would be an abomination upon the land. And so that's when I donned my black and white, and I covered myself with sackcloth, and I covered myself in garments to mourn, my sackcloth being a sign of injustice. And by day I drove away the beasts of the field that would nip at those dead bodies, and by day I drove away the vultures, and the birds would pick at them, and by night. And I held my vigil alone for nearly 5 months, and the drought continued. And then it was heard by King David of what I had done. And the Lord touched his heart, and he said, "Oh, she has done righteously. Go gather the dead bodies of the dead, and gather up the bodies of Jonathan and Saul, and gather their heads to be put with their bodies, and bring all those 9 souls and give them a royal burial." And the rains came, and the drought was over, and the land was again cleansed and satisfied. I don't think I can give away these clothes. They remind me too much of my life. I'm going to go put them back. Come with me, Abishag, and let's go remember how good King David was to bury the dead in a royal ceremony.